This video is brought to you by Airalo. The new Mac Mini with M2 and M2 Pro specifically are computers so many enthusiasts and creative professionals like myself have been waiting for, and compared to what was previously offered in this performance weight class, the versatility and value you get for the money is just mind-blowingly better. You see, before the days of Apple Silicon and the incredible M series Macs we know and love today, buying a powerful machine from Apple was a bit of a nightmare. You see, if you weren't crazy or rich enough to buy a Mac Pro with a Xeon server chip and ECC memory, you had only two options: a thermally throttled but portable clickety-clackety touch bar MacBook Pro, or a more powerful, clunky, ancient-looking 5K iMac 27-inch, both of which are essentially non-upgradable, might I remind you. And I was one of these people who had to make a tough choice, and I personally went the iMac route. I wanted something more powerful, not thermally stupid, and the built-in beautiful bright 5K display was a really attractive and important feature aspect in my purchasing decision. Though it wasn't perfect, I loved this machine and it served me very well, but I wasn't exactly thrilled that I shelled out $3,500 plus for a computer with a then 11-year-old chassis design and internals that would age far more quickly than I could ever imagine. And that they did. Within a year and a half of buying my iMac, the Fruit Company launched their first revolutionary entry-level lineup of Apple Silicon Macs, the M1 MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, and Mac Mini notably. The performance increase compared to their predecessors was shocking and still super impressive when compared to their high-end Intel counterparts. Within a few months of these new M1 Macs coming out, I had moved my entire creative workflow over to a 13-inch MacBook Pro with an M1 chip. And while this setup wasn't a perfect solution or transition, the benefits of Apple Silicon were undeniable, like battery life, for example, and I had to make this switch. But even with this new exciting shift though, I still really missed my iMac. The display, even with its gigantic dated bezels, was just too gorgeous to forget, and as mind-blowing as the M1 chip was, the iMac's performance, at least the one that I got, at the time was still marginally too much better CPU and GPU wise. It's important to remember that historically speaking, Apple's desktop machines and desktops in general have always typically offered more performance per dollar compared to MacBook and laptop offerings. Then in 2022, the iMac 27-inch was officially discontinued. In its place rose two entirely new products, the Mac Studio and Studio Display. The display aside, the Mac Studio, specifically the baseline, was and still pretty much is a great value. This machine at a minimum offers a powerful M1 Max chip, plenty of I/O, great cooling, power, and memory to spare for years to come. But its minimum $2,000 price point wasn't and still isn't ideal for everyone, especially for those who don't need 24 plus GPU cores and 32 gigs of unified memory minimum to bolster their workflow. That's where these new Mac Minis come in. Again, specifically the M2 Pro variant, which starts at just $1299. And at this price point, you get a pre-configured machine with a 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 16 gigs of unified memory, 512 gigs of internal storage, and while that might not be as impressive as a baseline Mac Studio, it is $700 cheaper and about equally performance CPU-wise, which is all you need for most everyday to some moderate to intensive tasks. The only caveats are that you're giving up some graphical horsepower and some memory, but again, not everybody needs these extra specs to do what they do. But before we continue with the video here, I have a brief message from today's video sponsor, Airalo, and their fantastic solution for using data while traveling abroad. Data roaming is so expensive when you travel within your continent or overseas, and physical SIMs are also wildly inconvenient to switch out, especially while on the go. That's why you need to purchase an eSIM from Airalo. They can get you immediately connected in over 200 plus countries. Airalo also allows you to communicate with your personal number and is easily accessible all within one intuitive app. Buying and installing an eSIM of your choice is super simple as well. Once bought, you can install your eSIM directly in the Airalo app. When in the Apple menu, first tap Continue again, then Done. Select your primary SIM as your default line, and for Apple iMessage and FaceTime, then select your eSIM as your default for cellular data. Once you arrive in your destination, go to Settings, Cellular, tap your new eSIM, and make sure Turn on this line is active. You also want to check APN status in the Airalo app. If it's set automatically, you're good to go, and if not, I'll leave a link to their very helpful tutorial which goes into even more detail about how to get set up. You can also rename or relabel your eSIM and settings as well. Airalo's eSIMs are regional and global, once again meaning you're covered in multiple countries, all while having you not worry about popping out a physical SIM and losing it, which could totally ruin whatever trip you're on. Check out my link in the video description for more info if you're interested. But getting back to the main topic of the video though, you can also configure the new Mac Mini up to a 12-core M2 Pro chip with a 19-core GPU, 32 gigs of unified memory, and up to 8 terabytes of internal storage. I personally don't recommend equipping one of these, or any Mac for that matter, beyond 4 terabytes. I'd say 1 to 2 terabytes is the sweet spot for storing important files and programs while retaining a nice amount of headroom for the future. 10 gigabit Ethernet is also an option if you want to spend an extra $100 and wait a little longer. My point in mentioning all this is to address the fact that now the Mac Mini is as bare bones or realistically powerful as you need it to be. This is especially true when considering the whack previous lineup. From late 2020 until just recently, you could buy a baseline M1 variant starting at $699 and an Intel variant at $1099. This space gray Intel Mac Mini also had 512 gigs of internal storage like the new base M2 Pro pre-config, but a much crappier 6-core Core i5 processor when compared to the M1, and only 8 gigabytes of DDR4, which is not as good compared to unified memory and Apple Silicon chips. So again, up until the release of these new Mac Minis, if you wanted something higher performance than something with an M1 chip, for example, you had to unnecessarily pay extra and either go the laptop route, specifically with an M1 Pro, MacBook Pro 14-inch or 16-inch, or opt for a baseline Mac Studio, which you likely could never properly utilize. The Mac Mini with the M2 Pro bridges this gap, and the form factor remains an absolutely fantastic modular solution for people who want to get the most bang for their buck out of Apple Silicon or a Mac in general. Like Steve Jobs said in 2005 at the launch of the Mac Mini, the beauty of the Mac Mini is that you BYODKM, bring your own display, keyboard, and mouse. This not only saves you a considerable chunk of change, but also gives you the freedom to choose peripherals you want. Do you want a keyboard with Cherry MX switches, a 4x3 monitor from 2004, and a mouse with a freaking trackball the size of an orange? By all means, equip your Mini however you'd like. This is especially great when you're insane enough to buy a Studio Display or Pro Display XDR like me. They are definitely not for everyone, and you can absolutely make do and be very happy with so many other third-party panels from Dell, LG, BenQ, and Eve, specifically the Eve Spectrum, which also touts an impressive bright 4K panel with a 144Hz refresh rate. But if you're a brightness scaling snob like I am and you want the best macOS experience on a display period, you can now more comfortably buy a display and know that you're not having aging hardware locked inside. I am of course mentioning or alluding to the discontinued iMac 27-inch, which you can unfortunately not use as a standalone display, nor would you necessarily want to because of how ugly it is nowadays. I digress though. You can drop $1,500 to $5,000 on a gorgeous, outrageous panel from Apple and hang on to that sucker for 5 to 10 years without a worry in the world. This Mac Mini modularity is so much more important for enthusiasts or pros, as your workflow can become more complex or simplified over the course of a year or two. To illustrate my point, let's say you bought an M2 Pro Mac Mini variant like the one I have that touts an M2 Pro 12-core, 19-core GPU, 32 gigabytes of memory, 2 terabytes of storage. This configuration would cost you $2,600, which is quite the bargain considering a 14-inch MacBook Pro equipped with the same specs would run you $700 more. But back to the Mini, you buy this machine with the intention of utilizing the hardware or whatever for your tasks, like video editing, software, app development, 3D modeling, intense graphic work, photo work, whatever you do. If your workflow suddenly demands more unified memory, more power, better thermals, you can always resell, recoup some of the cash, and put that towards an updated Mac Studio if it's still around, or better yet, a Mac Pro when it finally comes out. On the flip side, if your workflow becomes less intensive, let's just say you're doing more oversight or admin tasks, or you simply don't need as much horsepower anymore, you can sell this machine for 60 to 75% of what you paid for it, so that's about $1,600 to $1,900 USD. Buy a Mac Mini with an M2 or M3 chip for $600 to $800 and still have money left over. This also applies if your workflow needs to become portable. You can again resell and buy a MacBook Air or Pro accordingly without the need to get rid of your pre-existing peripherals, especially if we're talking about a pricey Apple display. There's also the situation where you might already own a MacBook or an iPad for your portable computing needs. If you want something distinctly Mac and more powerful, but also want to retain the portable form factor you already have on hand, opting for a Mac Mini is an incredible idea. This, again, is logical because even if you sold your pre-existing device, unless it's a newer iPad or Mac model, the $300, $400 that you'd recoup to resell or put towards a new MacBook Pro or MacBook Air would still ultimately get you less bang for your buck performance-wise. The money could better be spent or put towards a beefier Mac Mini. I mean, look at what you're getting for $1299 once again, especially compared to an equally priced MacBook Air M2. On a much more superficial note, the Mini's decade-old design is still a big benefit. I mean, sure, would I like to see something slimmer, trimmer, newer? Of course. But the Mini's chassis still looks good and is largely out of the way. For example, I literally placed my tilt-adjustable studio display right on top, which gives the panel a bit more height and makes the setup more consolidated or centered. You can also more easily conceal it on a desk, under a desk, behind a display. Hell, you could put it in a backpack or a laptop bag without much of an issue. The same cannot be said about a Mac Studio and especially a Mac Pro when it finally comes out. In short, like Apple's marketing suggests, the Mac Mini now offers more muscle and more hustle for a fraction of the cost and size, which is a big win for enthusiast Mac users. That is about it. I love this device. I actually have one right here. I've been using it. Shout out to Apple for providing me with this and the Studio display and a new MacBook Pro, which I will be talking about soon. Once again, check out my link to Airalo. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.